Hello everyone, it's our favorite West Virginia in space here, and I was searching on Drive-Thru-RPG one day when I happened to see that Onyx Pack Publishing released basically a source book for the Disparate Alliance of Mage 20th edition. I was pretty interested in this because I've been meaning to pick up some more Mage PDFs, and honestly, I just don't know that much about the crafts. They aren't talked about nearly as much as the fandom as the traditions of Technocracy because they are a more minor player in the game, and I want to learn more about them, so I decided to pick up their PDF. And I'm honestly kind of disappointed in the book, I'm not gonna lie here. It's not all bad, and I'm not gonna say it's not worth your money, but it definitely leaves stuff to be desired on multiple fronts. And I don't like how the crafts are presented in this book. And I feel it shows that the writers weren't really thinking very well when they made this. But anyway, let's get into what I'm actually talking about here. Now, this whole video will straddle the line between review, overview, thoughts on opinion, and ranting, but I want to start off with the opening bit, is that, despite the fact this is supposed to be the Disparate Alliance book, like the book that tells you how the Disparate Alliance works and its nature, you just do not get that in this book. We get a little bit more detail on it than how the Mage 20th book presented them, but barely. And this is all about the member crafts. And I know it was technically supposed to be covering the individual crafts, but this wasn't like we're covering just a whole bunch of smaller groups in Mage, and most of them happen to be in the Disparate Alliance. This is still presented as the Disparate Alliance book, and we get basically no information on how they function. Like, I am still left in the dark about, like, how the Disparate Alliance actually works. And I don't mean in a technical way, I understand how an alliance works, but I mean, like, how do they actually work together? Is it just an agreement not to attack each other? Do they share information? Do they ally? Are they sending mages over to each other to defend each other? Do they plan larger scale missions together? I get both little information, and the little information we do get is somewhat contradictory. Like how we get tiny information bits that suggest that the different crafts that make it up do work together and aid each other, but also get people saying how they don't step on each other's toes and stay out of each other's business. These two things can't be the same. And overall, it presents it with, I'm even less sure how the Disparate Alliance works now than I was just reading Mage 20th, which is not good when the book is supposed to be all about them. And then we get to the part that I really exacerbates the issue I'm going to get into the next chapter, is that fundamentally this has a lot of what I call future fates. Basically, because there are so many different Mage books and so many different interpretations, the Mage 20th line has always had these little sections of basically how different ways you can run it or do it. And in this book, they have a little future section for both if the Technocracy or the traditions are secretly controlled by the Nefandi, or basically if they're just evil. Now, this is one of those things that really cuts into the idea of Mage, is that one of the biggest themes that Mage the Ascension ended up having over time is that neither the Technocracy or traditions were all good or all bad, and not like in a clumsy way where both just do casually evil things for no discernible reasons. They both have their valid points, and you can see where they come from. They aren't always competent, they don't always make the best decisions even for their own missions, but you usually understand where they're coming from at least a certain perspective. How much you want to dial them in is very much up to you. Like, especially with the Technocracy books, they've done a generally good job of showing how you can play them anything from near pure evil to perfectly understandable, sympathetic, and often making the best calls they can. And this is all just how you want to run your Mage game. It can be dials you flip up and down. It doesn't have to be consistent with it, or it can change over time. It's one of the best parts about Mage, in my opinion, is that they have such a strong idea of the factions that you can shift these things around. But in this book, they also present the crafts with this thing. Basically, are the crafts secretly evil or controlled by the Nefandi, other stuff like that. And this is where they kind of mess up. Not because giving them this option is bad. No, it just puts the crafts on the same level as the other factions, which they're supposed to kind of be. At least from a meta perspective. But rather than the book goes out of its way to basically say, you shouldn't make the Disparate Alliance secretly evil, or secretly played evil, or secretly being controlled by evil, because it's offensive, or stuff like that. This automatically creates an issue, not political, because it puts the Disparate Alliance on a pedestal. It puts them as the golden boys, the fun faction that isn't bad. They're the real good guys, and this kind of comes off at different points in the book, where the book is kind of convinced that the Disparate Alliance are the real good guys of the setting. And at first, I thought it was supposed to be kind of an in-universe bias. A lot of books are kind of like that, World Artist books, where there's kind of a level in-universe bias. But that's not really what's presented here, especially with the Future Fates section, which are never written from an in-universe perspective. They're always out-of-universe meta context. That they put the Disparate Alliance on this pedestal, and not only does it cut one of the biggest interesting parts of Mage is the different philosophies of why they do what they do and who's really the good guy and what are you really fighting for, by effectively saying, oh yeah, the Disparate Alliance are the real good guys. The other guys, they could be, maybe they're okay, maybe they're bad, doesn't matter, but the Disparate Alliance, they're the real good guys. But also because it means that the crafts that make up the Disparate Alliance now have a much different role in the narrative. Because when something like a group like the Progenitors or the Order of Hermes does something evil or bad, or messed up, or just not good, that makes sense on some level because they're supposed to be a kind of flawed faction. Nobody's perfect, everyone makes mistakes, no one's really supposed to be the ultimate good guy. But then the book has the crafts presented as effectively the true good guys of the setting, and then they do stuff equally questionable as the others, or at the very least not good at all, that doesn't really line up. And this is actually what I'm going to kind of have the next part of the video be, is basically pointing out the times where the crafts are kind of messed up and the book doesn't seem to realize it. Let's get into that. Before we get into this next part, I want to give a little bit of addendum. One, I am terrible at pronouncing names, so if I pronounce any of these names wrong, I'm sorry. I'm just not that great at pronouncing. I don't mean it as an offensive thing at all, or to be purposely annoying, or anything like that. And the second thing, I'm not going over everything that these factions have listed on them in this chapter or this video, actually. I'm going over specifically parts that feel really dumb and make no sense. That's specifically what I'm getting at here. I'm not even going to go over all of the factions in the same degree just because of that. Just to kind of get some context of what I'm about to do here, okay? Okay, cool. So the first one up is... Okay, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that one. I'm sorry, guys, but I'm not even going to try it. But we get two things I want to talk about. One is that in one of the stories, the people like mentors kind of telling a new member of this group in a way is, you know, it's a story, it makes sense, blah, blah, blah. And one of the figures that shows up in it is Anansi. Anansi, the West African spider god. This doesn't seem to cause a problem until you realize that this faction, who I can't pronounce the name without saying something very bad, is based on Eastern Africa, specifically at the Egypt-Nubia region. Those guys didn't have a Nazi. They didn't believe him. There just wasn't a thing there. It would be like if I was telling a story based in... if I had a faction based on, like, Celtic mythology, and all of a sudden a Japanese god showed up out of nowhere. It'd be bizarre. And you can't even say something like the slave trade to the Americas, because, once again, the slave trade went to the Americas, not Eastern Africa, pretty much. So that doesn't even make sense. Like, the writers clearly just said, oh, look, an African god, and put it in there, and then didn't do any kind of research to see if that made any sense at all. And the other thing is, we kind of get a running theme with a lot of these factions is not learning from the past. And I know this sounds weird, but hear me out. Is that this faction, one of their backstory is that the Tenocracy came, ruined everything, beat them up, all that jazz. It was, vague related to colonialism. You get the whole idea. But, and this is something kind of pointed out, is that the new student asked the question of, like, if we were so great, how come we failed? And granted, the mentor character just pointed out that they just don't know how they failed. Presumably they messed up somewhere along the way or could have done something better, but they don't seem to have learned from that mistake. And I don't mean that in the sense of, oh, look, you're stupid or anything. I mean, it's that this faction would never win any serious battles by doing the same things that have failed. That's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a different result. And that's kind of what they're doing. They are literally just running their head into a wall and hoping for different results. Or in this case, running your head into the Technocracy and hoping for different results. Also, one more minor detail. is that they go into a little mini rant at a point that the Library of Alexandria wasn't that important to Egypt, and that they say there was the actual Library of Egypt. That is complete BS. The Library of Alexandria was the main library of Egypt for a very long time. It was extremely important for the Egyptians for a very long time. That was not something that was just like there that then the Europeans made more important. That was very important. That's just like a historical fact that they just messed up for some reason. I don't know why. Wow, I spent a long time on this just with one faction, but the setup was important for what's going to happen after, okay? Let's move on. Skipping right a bit of ways from the order where these factions are written, we have the Ahi-i-Batin. I really hope I'm pronouncing that right. And they are a Middle Eastern and a little bit of North Africa inspired faction with a hint of Persia there for some flavor. And they have the basic stuff going on. They're very much like the subtle ones compared to the more loud other Middle Eastern style faction. And all that stuff today. But we get into the same issue I mentioned earlier where they had bad things happen in the past and then didn't seem to do anything in regarding to try to adapt their strategies so they aren't running their head into a wall again. But we also get the first taste of hypocrisy. Now, once again, they're very much, our faction was destroyed by not destroyed, but heavily damaged by colonialism. We want to get revenge against the technocracy, all that jazz. Or take our people back. It kind of depends of what point they're asking. But the issue that runs into this is when they complain about modern America and blah blah blah, where they complain that the Americans and other Western nations won't just let them come in. While I don't mean this as a political issue about the modern day stuff, I mean this purely as a logistical thing. Is that the Ahi-i-Batin, I really hope I'm saying that name right, the whole stick is that they're complaining that a bunch of Western nations, or the technocracy, depending on the day, came into their nations, their people, and did what they want, and without they couldn't stop them. Basically, they forcibly came in there. And then they want to come into other places and get pissy when people don't let them come in freely and do whatever they want. That is hypocrisy. Literally, they are being hypocrites. And it's not pointed out at all. Which, once again, if we go back to the fact that the book puts this faction on the Disparate Alliance on a pedestal, and we get this, once again, of them being put on a pedestal, and it's the serious questions of, did the writers actually think any of this through? But this wouldn't be so bad if they were supposed to be, once again, another morally gray faction with questionable ethics. Or if the book just acknowledged the hypocrisy. But they don't. They just do not acknowledge it. I don't know why. The next one I want to talk about is the Kula. I cannot say this right. I can't say these names right. I'm sorry. But they're like the native Hawaiian and Polynesian inspired faction of the Disparate Alliance. And overall, their faction is actually pretty interesting. And also something nice, they actually are one of the few factions to look at their past and see how to adapt around it. They noted that being racist and sexist and all these things was not helping them. Being too stuck in tradition and not adapting to the changing world was hurting them. So they had to adapt and learn better. And I was like, wow, this faction's actually good. It was actually interesting. And then they just randomly say how they want to make Hawaii secede from America. Okay, first of all, as the book even points out, they got no game plan once they actually succeed at that. They got no idea what they're going to do. Once they get Hawaii, they say, we'll figure it out when we get there. That is a terrible strategy. And by their own admission, they even point out that if they do that, they could easily become just taken over a pawns of Russia or China or whoever. So by their own admission, their mission statement is to make Hawaii break away from America, and then which could be very risky and could get them in all kinds of trouble, and then they're just going to figure out what they're going to do after that. That is a terrible strategy and undercuts the whole point earlier about them changing with the times and accepting the new people in here by basically trying to go backwards. And then this is when actually a friend pointed out that I did not immediately notice is how are these guys different from the Confederacy or something? The whole stick is that they want to break their part of America away so they can go back to their quote unquote traditional values. Isn't that an awful lot like the Confederacy? And Hawaii isn't like some place America took over 2 seconds ago. They've been part of America for over 100 years and a state for 50 plus. No one they are a full-on state. No one considers them weird. it's such a bizarre thing to do, and it undercuts so much of what the rest of their faction was about. It's bizarre, and I don't think the writers thought that through very well, like at all. Next up are the Sisters of Hippolyta, who are once again one of the factions that actually kind of learned from the past, specifically that hiding away and just waiting for things to get better is not going to actually make things get better. And overall, they're not the worst written faction. I mean, but they do run into some weird issues of, like, I'm not sure what their end goal is. And specifically, it's like, they're all about women's rights, women protection, all that jazz, but at what point are they happy? Like, at what point do they get what they want? Like, they point out how modern society is super sexist against women, especially the West in America, and while there are some minor cultural issues left behind, we've made a lot of progress, and I'm not entirely sure what the Sisters of Hippolyta are actually wanting. Like, what do they want? Like, as a friend of mine pointed out, the same one from before, is that this would make sense if this faction was in, like, the 60s or the 50s or something like that, or in the before 1920s. But in the modern day, written to be set in 2025, this is such a bizarre thing for them to be talking about in such a fashion. And the thing, not because bad things are happening to women or sex people out there, but the way they talk about it is if women are still second-class citizens, which hasn't been true in decades, a very long time, several generations. And you think they'd be more concerned about, like, oh, I don't know, parts of Africa and the Middle East where women are still second-class citizens, which, ironically enough, is where members of their own Disparate Alliance faction are located, who could presumably be very helpful in trying to deal with that, but they just don't seem to care about that. They're only concerned about, like, modern, mostly white-class, upper-class women and relatively minor social issues, why in many parts of the world women are still treated as property. Not a great look for them, really. Second to last one I want to talk about is the Bata'a. I cannot say that right, but I'm gonna try to. I'm gonna go with pronouncing beta. And oh my, I actually hate these guys. Like, I mean this in a very as nice a way possible. I absolutely despise these guys. Why? Because they're literally just they're just black gangster drug hood stereotypes. I mean, like, that's literally what they speak broken English, they talk only about, like, the hood and the gang and life and all that jazz, and drugs and all that jazz. The artwork given to them is, I swear, is so stereotypically, almost borderline racist gangster hood stereotype. And it's just like, you're supposed to be representing, like, the West Africans who got sent in the slave trade in voodoo and all such. You have so many interesting things to draw upon, and you instead choose to almost exclusively draw from gangsterhood stereotypes. That is just, why would you do this? Why would you limit a very interesting faction with so many diverse elements you could draw from? Instead, you make them gangsterhood people who can't talk right. Why would you do that? That is borderline offensive, if not actually offensive. I don't know why they would do this. And what's even dumber is that they do so many dumb things. And it's just, the dumbest part has to be when the guy who's talking about his faction literally points out that, like, they aren't slaves anymore in America, in the West and all that jazz. They got their equal rights, and in America we had a black president. And then they go, say, that ain't shit, that ain't, like, we want real, like, liberation. And you might think, what the heck is that, okay? Like, what is actual real liberation if you have equal rights, held the highest office in the land? And I was thinking, okay, is the faction ever going to explain what that is? No! They want real freedom and liberation, quote-unquote, but we get no idea what that is. I have no idea what these guys actually want, which is really bad for a faction who, like, the faction is supposed to have a goal, something they're trying to do, and I got no idea what these people are trying to do. Like, they are part of the Disparate Alliance, which makes it even worse, because, like, at least with Disparate Alliance, I can kind of understand that they're part of, like, a mutual defense pact, kind of, whatever that means, but, like, they don't even have that. it's like, what do you want? At no point in their book do they explain what the heck, the chapter, what the heck do they want? So what do they want? It's stupid. They're idiots, borderline racist in some ways, and it basically just an amalgamation of bad stereotypes with nothing interesting going on, and a total waste of a faction spot. The fact, of all the interesting, Voodoo has so many interesting stuff you could play with, but instead they choose to throw it away. It's just to make it a dumb gangster stereotype. It's real disappointing, not gonna lie. Last and honestly maybe least, we have the Children of Knowledge, who are alchemists, and the whole stick is that they don't do base alchemy where they turn lead into gold. They want to ascend to become beings of pure energy or something like that. And honestly, they're kind of boring. Honestly, I think they were more interesting in Mage 20th core book, when they were they had elements of being the Elite guys, but also just kind of crazy drug people, which they've kind of lost in this book. So they're just kind of shut-in idiots. And I say idiots because they mention how they keep getting kicked out of places because people hire them to turn lead into gold, and then they don't do it, so people get mad at them and kick them out or hunt them down. But they openly mention that turning lead into gold and making people rich is child's play. So they are going around getting hired by people willingly, of their own accord. They willingly sign into these agreements to make them rich, fail to make them rich when it would be super easy for them. Then they get hunted down, or people get pissed at them, and then they blame everyone else. That's not... and then they try to play themselves as being victims of everyone else hating them, when they brought it all upon themselves. The traditions hating you, the technocracy hating you, everyone not liking you is a completely valid opinion for those groups to have, because by your own admission, you willingly go into agreements to make people rich, make some gold and all that jazz, and then refuse to do it because you want to pursue real alchemy. Even though by your own admission you need other groups to get you supplies so you can do that, but then you don't hold up your end of the bargain. Once again, the book presents these guys as the true good guys of Mage. People who just can't do their basic job. Once again, were the writers high when they wrote this? Were the writers taking the Children of Knowledge drugs? I'm just curious now, okay? Was the Cult of Ecstasy involved here? I'm curious. Can we do a fact check on that? Now, I know I've been overwhelmingly negative in this video, and it's kind of true, but it's not like this book was all bad. Ironically enough, the Knights Templar faction was pretty well written. The Orphans, despite being objective kind of jerks, really, seriously. There's a lot of groups in Mage that can be called jerks, but somehow I think the Orphans take the cake. And some other sections with some of the factions are really interesting. And I like the idea of the Disparate Alliance in some theory. I like the idea that instead of it just being a simple, mages on this one, magic users with the traditions and tech users with the technocracy, the Disparate Alliance adds some flavor to it, makes it interesting. At least makes it. But I don't understand their place in the Ascension War. And that's kind of a problem, because on some point, it's that this book was a book of missed opportunities. That's what it really was. They had so many interesting factions they could have really done some stuff with, and they just didn't do much with them. I think it's a great example how in Mage 20th, they had a little section where they mentioned, for the most part, new mage groups, new crafts we haven't seen before, that could join the Disparate Alliance. And in this book, instead of detailing them, they just give little blurbs about, what they would do, what they might be up to, but we don't actually learn anything about them. They get a paragraph each, not rather than a mini chapter, which is stupid because most of these groups have not been referenced in any other book. This is the time for them to shine, to actually write up their lore, and they just don't do it here. This book is a book of missed opportunities, really. And I know some people will say, oh, I just hate it because it doesn't agree with my politics or whatever. I don't care. That's not it. If there is any political issue in this book, it's not because the writers are woke or left-leaning or whatever. It's because the writers didn't realize that whatever political stuff they wanted to say didn't make sense with the actual way the game was written. And if anything, that's almost worse. In fact, in some ways, I'd almost be more happy if the book was secretly written by, right-wing cults somewhere. Because then it would explain why they made all these different groups look like assholes. And even then, it's they point out how this group is the Disparate Alliance is supposed to be like the group of like women and people of color and LGBT people and all that jazz, but yet those groups, like women, people of color, LGBT, etc., have existed in the other two groups. The technocracy, depending on variety, has somewhat shifted around it on whether they stand there. But the traditions have never had that problem. The traditions are made up of tons of different diverse traditions and such. If anything, the game is almost cutting its own actual diversity by claiming that all these other groups doing all these other things were just not actually diverse or interesting or whatever. It's very bizarre, honestly. And it's just sad because I wanted this book to be good. I want the Disparate Alliance to be interesting. I don't necessarily want them to be the group I want to play, as I think but they make an interesting third faction. Like in a lot of RTS games, they have like three main factions, right? Usually one faction is not quite as important. It fills a kind of secondary role to the two main ones, but the fact is they adds spice and makes it interesting. That's what the Disparate Alliance could really be in the game. Or if they're written really well, they could maybe just be full-on able to stand up with traditions or technocracy. But they just don't, and this book was their chance, and the writers fumbled the bag. I don't know why they fumbled the bag. I don't know how. I know how they fumbled the bag. Don't know and I don't know why they did it, and I'm kind of disappointed, to be at all honest. And I think if there's any point I think could show this better, is that in each chapter for each like of the each one of the like different crafts in the Disparate Alliance and all that jazz, there's no like plot point section. Many other World of Darkness books give like little plot points of like, if you're playing this group, you can do this. Like in Mage the Awakening, for example, in their like crafts book, they would do this. Like they're like Legacies books. They would have like little plot points for each faction that just is not here. They just didn't do it here for some reason. In fact, it's so bad I'm writing my own list just because I can. And I'm disappointed. I wanted this book to be better. But overall, that's just my opinion. What did you think of the book, the Disparate Alliance book? I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. Write down below. Tell me which faction was your favorite in the book and other things that I made if you want to. And I will see you all next time.
Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.